and puts the Gate of Ephraim in the same position as later additions.
This map was printed circa 1734 in Augsburg. The author is Matthäus Solter. And we can see one plan of Jerusalem and one view here below. It's a printed map and hand-colored.
Right. And do you know when it shows the time?
Well, it relates to the ancient city of Jerusalem.
Before Christ?
I believe so.
Golgotha is shown inside the northern boundary, opposite the present garden tomb. Due to the height of the rock, no gate existed adjacent to Calvary. The nearest is what we now call the Damascus Gate, which is believed to have been built over the old gate. This print, almost certainly from the same period as the other, shows the sites in more detail and where they are today at the northern corner and just outside the Damascus Gate. Peter, our guide to the tomb in the garden, is quite clear. If a chapel did stand at this spot, it would have been very ancient and date from long before Jerusalem became part of the Muslim Empire. If this was the case, it would be evidence of very early Christian worship on this site, earlier than the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Look back at the outside of the tomb, the way it's arched over the top and the ledges have suggested that perhaps there was an early place of Christian worship built on the outside of this tomb. In other words, like a little church. And it's suggested that there, where those people are standing, could have been a baptismal pool for baptisms. And the water would have drained through that channel, running across to a water cistern that's behind that first door. Now, if you look up here, there's a very interesting cross carved on the rock face. Can you see the shape of it? It's unusual. That's the top part, and the upright of the cross comes down and ends in a hook. Now, we believe that was put there during the Byzantine period, so it's pretty old, and it's meant to look like a ship's anchor. Now, early Christians chose that shape because in the letter to Hebrews, Jesus is referred to as the anchor of our souls, and that was adopted as a symbol of their faith. So there are these signs here that perhaps early on Christians were coming here. Were they venerating this place because they believed it was the tomb of Jesus?
The final question must be, is the site of the crucifixion below the place of the skull, where our research team is standing? Or above the escarpment, as shown in the next picture? We can find nothing in the scriptures to tell us. But this painting dates back to the 14th century. It was painted in France, and Simon unearthed this copy in the British Library. Here is Jesus on the cross, but what's most interesting is behind him. Could this be evidence of the escarpment below the skull? If we consider the provenance of this picture, France in the 14th century, there's something else we should consider. The Knights Templar were very powerful at this time in France, too powerful for the king. He seized their treasure and condemned them to death. But the Knights Templar guarded the holy places in Jerusalem, just the people to know where the crucifixion took place and where Jesus was buried. General Gordon argued that it must be above the place of the skull because it's the highest point of all. As a military commander, he knew the importance of seizing and holding high ground, and the symbolic reasons for crucifying Jesus where the entire city might see. As we have seen, both the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and the Tomb of the Garden are accepted by one set of scholars or another as the site of Jesus' tomb. The Holy Sepulchre has centuries of tradition behind it and the first Christian Roman emperor as its patron. In contrast, we have the tomb in the garden, relatively unspoiled, tranquil, green, an oasis in the city, all the good things we expect of a garden. The garden, too, has become caught up in the battles and feuds between the different denominations. For a time, at General Gordon's instigation, the Anglican Church adopted the site, but no longer. On one level, what does it matter which or either is the true site of the tomb?
Frankly, I don't mind what we think about the place, because the place isn't important. What is important is the person behind the place. And the person behind this place is none other than the resurrected Lord Jesus Christ. And 2,000 years ago, death couldn't hold Jesus. And the glorious message of the garden is this, that 2,000 years on, likewise, death won't hold those of us who die in Christ Jesus.
Is the tomb in the garden nothing more than a pleasant place to pray, as some scholars have said? We don't think so, and in this film, the team believe that they have made the case for the tomb in the garden being the site of Jesus' tomb.
So, drawing from all of the resources we have used, what have we discovered about this story?
We know from St. Matthew's Gospel that the crucifixion site was at a place called Golgotha, that is to say, a place of the skull, and we have seen this in the rock formation. Only yards from here, there is a tomb cut from the rock, which St. Matthew describes thus: after wrapping Jesus in a clean linen cloth, Joseph of Arimathea laid him in his own new tomb, which he had hewn from the rock. If this was Joseph of Arimathea's garden, he would have most likely chosen to be buried there. And we know that nearby there is a large cistern for irrigating the garden.
Way back from a tree back there, way down through here, it's deep down underneath, it's plastered with ancient Roman plaster, and we can store up in here 250,000 gallons of water.
The Bible speaks of an earthquake at the moment of Jesus' death, and Simon can be seen pointing at a large split in the rock.
But the Bible also says there was a violent earthquake. And interestingly enough, there is a large earthquake right here in the rock face. Can you see that? Which could, of course, be evidence of that very earthquake.
The tomb is large enough to accommodate not only Peter and John, but also the two angels Mary Magdalene saw in the tomb, in white sitting, one at the head and one at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. We know from the graffiti inside the tomb that it was a place of worship, only decades after the resurrection. Outside the tomb is evidence of a stone track and a piece of very old metal driven high up into the rock, which we think was a spike to prevent anyone breaking into the tomb and rolling the 9-ton stone away. Like all good storytellers, we are keeping the most interesting and exciting piece of evidence until last. On Easter morning, Mary and the disciples found the tomb empty, with the burial sheets still there. We know this because St. Luke tells us that Peter ran into the tomb and found the strips of linen lying by themselves.
He has risen.
Risen now, the body's stolen.
He said, after 3 days I will rise again.
Risen?
He's alive.
Turin Cathedral is home to a relic venerated by many and questioned by some. It is a piece of cloth that carries the marks of a human body, a man whose face and torso are bloody, lacerated, and tortured. The cloth also shows the marks from what could be a crown of thorns and a spear wound in the side. It is just as Jesus' body would have looked when it was placed in the tomb. This is the Turin Shroud. You will remember the tomb in the garden had been hurriedly cut out, as if the body which was going to be buried was taller than the man who had given the tomb, the man who should have been buried in it.
Have a look around, you can see the whole place is shaped. Cut, made, and over here is the lochra, the grave area. Now we've got two graves here. This one, and this has never been finished. This is how they would cut a grave. Just square, stone pillar at this end, resting place, and then they would wait until they knew how tall the person was to be rested there. And then they would finish it as we see that grave on the far side. It's got a foot portion cut out, just a little portion cut out for their feet. That tells us that grave was used. Someone lay there. And the New Testament says that Joseph gave to Jesus a new tomb in which no one else ever lay.
On a hunch, Simon contacted 10 scholars who over the years have worked on the Turin Shroud. There were many questions he wanted to ask, but one held the key for him. How tall was the man in the Turin Shroud? The first reply dropped into his email box in just an hour. In reply to your enquiry, the height of the man in the Turin Shroud is 5 feet 11 inches. A tall man, then, would fit into the hurriedly altered tomb. The extra inches would accommodate Jesus rather than the 5 feet 8 of Joseph of Arimathea. This was most exciting news for Simon. That night, he could not sleep as he waited for the other replies to drop in. All were of the same opinion. One reply was from Barry Schwartz, an American who had been the official photographer of the Shroud of Turin research project. In 1978, this was the first scientific attempt to prove the shroud's authenticity. Barry confirmed the team's findings.
First question people always ask me is, how did you get involved with the Shroud of Turin? After all, you're Jewish. And of course, I always say pretty much the same thing. That's exactly what I said when they asked me. I had finished a scientific project for Los Alamos National Laboratories through a company in Santa Barbara where my studio was. At the end of that project, the gentleman called me and he said, "Barry, what do you know about the Shroud of Turin?" And I said, "But Don, I'm Jewish." And he said, "So am I," remember, because he too was one of the Jewish team members. At any rate, I didn't feel very comfortable at the beginning with this, and I continued to be a member of the team for about 2 months, and I was still feeling very uncomfortable about my involvement. And I came to the conclusion that perhaps I shouldn't be a member of the team. And what I said to Don Lynn from the Jet Propulsion Laboratories, who was one of the real imaging experts on our team, was, "Gee, Don, what's a nice Jewish boy like me doing involved on such a Christian project?" And he looked at me and he said, "Apparently, Barry, you've forgotten that the man in question is a Jew." And of course I said, "No, I know that." And he says, "So you don't think God would want one of his chosen people on our team?" And I laughed and I said, "Of course I didn't think that." And then he said, "Look, Barry, let me give you some advice. Go to Turin, do the best job you can. One day you'll know why, because God doesn't tell you in advance what the plan is." Well, that seemed like pretty good advice to me. And I stayed on the team, and I've now been involved directly in the examination and the study and the research on the Shroud of Turin for 30 years. In addition,